Hello, Chris here again. Let's learn how to UV unwrap our model. So we've already discussed what UVs are and why we need them. We've also looked at the UV editor and what UVs look like. So I want you to imagine that this cube is made of paper and that you need to cut it in such a way that we can lay it out flat. It is a default polygon primitive cube, so it does already currently have UVs. I can see them here. Here are the UVs. And if we're cutting it and laying out flat, we need to think about where our seams are going to be. We always have to cut along an edge. We can't cut in the middle of a face. So it always has to be along an edge. And one way you could think about UVs and texturing, aside from your model being made of paper or cardboard and cutting it out, would be thinking about one of those chocolate bunnies that has foil wrapped around it, and that foil is painted to look like a bunny. And if you were to unwrap that foil and lay it down flat, you'd see that it would be a bit distorted, right? But once you wrap it back up on the chocolate bunny, it wraps around appropriately. So that's kind of our goal. We need to unwrap our 3D model so that we can actually texture it. So I'm going to change my workspace from Maya Classic to UV editing. And let's zoom in on the one-to-one space here. So as mentioned before, UVs have components just like polygons have components, and we can get to them the same way through the marking menu, right? So edges, faces, UV. And UV shell would be the equivalent of object mode. So if I were to have more than one shell, right, and in the 3D viewport, if I had more than one object, I need to be in object mode to go back and select back and forth between them, right? So if we are in the viewport and we have more than one UV shell, we need to be in UV shell mode, right? So we can select both of those shells and move them around. So I'm gonna, let's see, sew this back up. I'm going to go ahead and delete these UVs, and from this point forward it'd be nice if you followed along. So UV, delete UVs. Most of the time when you have a 3D model, you'll have a bunch of UVs in here that are all twisted and deformed, and that's normal, okay? And you do not actually need to go to UV and delete UVs to UV unwrap it. Essentially, whenever you go through the process of creating UVs for various faces, it will override the previous UVs. So in effect, it's the same thing. So on the right-hand side of we have the UV toolkit. Up here in this menu, I can click on UV and I can get to most of those tools in here as well, all right? The first thing we need to do is go to this Create drop-down. And when we create UVs, what we're doing is we are projecting rays at the model and seeing what is bouncing back. We want to try and capture the faces and have them not be distorted and lay them out. You can think about creation other than capturing rays. You could think about creating UVs by holding a mirror up to the model and seeing what is being reflected in the surface. So for example, if I wanted to UV unwrap this face here, I could hold a mirror up above it that would look straight down at it. So if we think of the mirror analogy, the creation method basically has a bunch of different ways that we can control our mirror from which direction and angle it is facing. So let's go ahead and capture this top face first. I went to face mode. I'm going to select this top face. And then under create, the first tool that I want you to know, the first sort of mirror direction is this planar map. So if I hold shift and click on planar, it will pull up the planar mapping options. We want to capture this face looking straight down at it. So we need to select the project from y-axis and then make sure this keep image width height ratio box is checked. I believe by default it is unchecked. Then hit apply and close out. So now you can see over here we have a UV shell. It takes up the entire 1-to-1 space. So I'm going to shrink it down. And if we click on our checker map to check the distortion, you'll see that the checker boxes are completely square and the text is not distorted. So I'm not getting any distortion on this. The reason why is because this face is perfectly pointing upward, right? So the mirror was looking at it like this, and it captured the entirety of the face distortion free. So that's great. So let's do this again. I'm going to go to face mode, and I'm going to select this top face and this bottom face. So this bottom face also is in that direction, right? Like the majority of it is pointing in the y-axis. So if I have this face and this face selected, let me turn checkerboard off, and then I do a planar map again from the y and hit apply, you'll see that, let's turn checkerboard back on, that both faces have now been unwrapped, right? So I can unwrap more than one face at a time using these creation tools. Go ahead and click on this little icon right here. This is shaded mode, and you'll see that I have this magenta square. If I go to UV shell mode, click once, hit W for my move tool, and move this off, you'll see that it was magenta because there was a red face and a blue face on top of each other. And that makes sense, right? These are directly on top of each other when looking at them from the top. So the reason why this is red is because it's inside out. You'll notice that the text is inside out, its polygons are one-sided, and it was projected from this angle. So whenever you have a red shell, you need to flip it. To flip it, you can go to this modify and flip after you've selected it. So now I have these two faces projected and distortion free. That's great. What if I selected this face and this face, and I went to hold shift, went to planar, and I projected from the Z, which would be a mirror looking at it from this direction. So Z, apply. You'll see, oh, okay, here's one shell and here's another shell. The checker map is on. Let's check for distortion. And yeah, see, it is incredibly distorted and stretched, and that's because, right, these faces are not visible from this angle. There is no thickness to them. So this kind of signifies the importance of choosing the correct method to create your UVs from. So let's go ahead and modify, flip this one, scale these down, and I'm just going to move them to the side for now. Then I'll go ahead and select this face and this face. Now let's go ahead and do a planar map from the Z. I'm looking at this little compass here and saying, oh, okay, so the Z direction is going this way, right? So, and that's what I want. So Z, apply. Scale these down, move one, and flip this. Modify, flip. All right, let's move these to the side. All right, the last two faces we have are these faces. So let's select those faces, and let's do another planar in the X this time. And same thing, I'm going to move one off and take this and modify, flip. Okay, so I have 6 faces that are distortion free, which is great. The main issue I have right now is threefold actually. The first being that each one of these faces, none of this is in the one-to-one space. The one-to-one space, right, is right here, and all of the faces need to fit inside of here. They currently cannot fit inside because they're all scaled differently. They also are every face has its own shell, which is a problem. There are too many seams, so we could reduce the number of seams and we could get it to all fit inside of here. So let's talk briefly about texel density. Texel is a word that's a combination of pixel and texture, And texel density refers to the size of the UV shell inside of the one-to-one space. And each one of these faces here, I've selected all of these shells, and you can see I've selected the faces. Each face is the same size, right? However, the UVs for each face is a different size. This is a problem. The problem is that whatever resolution we have in this one-to-one space for our texture, let's say it's 2048. So if we think about faces inside of a 2048 by 2048 canvas or texture, and if those faces are the same size but the UVs are a different size, then we're going to get poor results, and texture detail will vary in quality and resolution throughout. Let's see what that looks like. So if I were to scale this down like this and just kind of sloppily do this, and we'll say this one's pretty small, this one's also small, this one's even smaller, so something like this. Okay, so I've taken this object with the faces that are the same size, but the UV shells that represent those faces are different sizes, and you can see that as I rotate around this brick, that the brick is of different quality and different sizes throughout. And most of the time this is not what we want, right? Even putting aside the fact that things don't line up, you know, if I wanted to add maybe graffiti or something interesting to this side, to all sides, it would probably show up in nice, you know, nicely and crisply in here, because I have a lot of pixels, a lot of texture room to paint here, right? Whereas over here, or even better here, right, I have very few pixels to paint on. It's the difference between being able to paint a line and have that line look pretty crisp and nice versus something like this on a this is a very low res. This is a very low res canvas, right? Like I believe it's 64 by 64. If I were to fill that, I don't have the pixel space to make, you know, high resolution details. So if I had any sort of diagonal texture work going on, or, you know, text or anything other than a pure color or a straight line, it's going to get this aliasing, this pixelation. So let's go back here and let's fix the texel density. So to fix the texel density, you need to get all of the shells to be the same size. And we go through a little process to do that. First, select a shell and scale it to the size that you think you need that shell to be. Then over here in the transform menu, open it up and scroll down, and where it says texel density, hit get. This number will change. Then select all of these faces, all the other UV shells, and hit set. And notice how it set all of these UV shells to this same texel density number. And now they're all the same size. And if I rotate around this cube, you'll see that the details are all the same. So if I undo that, instead of applying an image here to check the texel density, right, I can just click on the checker map, and you can see, oh, there's very few pixels in this area compared to this area, right, or this one. So all these squares are different sizes, meaning the texel density is off. So select one shell, get the texel density, and then set all the other shells. To combine shells, right now we have a bunch of seams, right? So first I want to understand what shell is what, and let's find this bottom shell. I can click on this face and find it. And I want to go to edge mode and select an edge. When I roll over an edge or select an edge, it will select the two UV edges that represent the single component edge, right? So I only have one edge selected, but I have the two UV shell edges selected. I want to sew these together. There are a couple ways that you can do this. If you open up this cut and sew and click on this stitch together, it will move that shell over and stitch it. I use the marking menu. So if I select an edge and then I hold shift and right click and hold, and I go to this move and sew edges, or stitch together would be fine too. So I can select this edge now, move and sew, move and sew, move and sew. And that's the same as clicking on the stitch together. Then I can go to UV shell mode, select the shell, move it down here, and we want to make sure that our UV shell is not going beyond the 1-to-1 space, so I know I need to scale this down a little bit, like so. The distance between the border of the 1-to-1 space and the border from one shell to another shell is called edge padding, and you need to make sure that you always have edge padding of at least a few pixels so that you don't get texture errors. So in this video we talked about the concept of unfolding our model. We also discussed the Planar Mapping tool under Create in Planar. We talked about shells that are inside out and using Modify Flip to fix it. We also talked about Texel Density and going through the process of selecting a UV shell, getting the Texel Density, selecting the rest of the shells, and setting the Texel Density to the same size so that we have even resolution throughout. And then we talked about sewing shells together. In the next video we will explore more creation tools as well as the unfold tool and some of the other tools to make sure that your UVs are organized correctly.